A message in the dark. At 3:17 in the morning, on June 6, 1944, inside a German command post in northern France, a field telephone began to ring. The room was already awake before the sound came. No one in that room had slept properly for weeks. Men moved through the half-light with paper folders under their arms, boots scraping across wooden floors, the smell of tobacco, damp wool, and cold coffee hanging in the air. On one wall, a map of the French coast was covered with grease pencil marks. Normandy, Brittany, Le Havre, Cherbourg, Calais. Calais was circled more heavily than the others. A radio operator leaned forward with one hand pressed against his headphones. The signal was poor. The words came through broken by static, like someone speaking from beneath water. Reports from the coast. Parachutes, aircraft, gliders, explosions inland, naval movement offshore. Something was happening in Normandy. But that was the problem. Something was happening. It did not yet mean the real thing was happening. For months, German intelligence had expected the Allied invasion to come across the narrowest part of the channel. Pas-de-Calais made sense. It was the shortest route from England to France. It was the most direct road toward Germany. It was the place where any rational invasion planner would want to land if he wanted speed, pressure, and a straight line into the Reich. Normandy was dangerous. Calais was logical. And war has a way of punishing men who confuse logic with truth. Inside that command post, the officers did not have the luxury of hindsight. They had fragments, reports from frightened coastal units, rumors of paratroopers, wires cut, radar confusion, the distant pressure of Allied aircraft filling the night sky. Every message seemed urgent, but none of them seemed complete. A staff officer bent over the table and followed the coast with his finger. Normandy was under attack. But Calais was still quiet. Too quiet. That silence became its own kind of sound. Because the Germans did not only fear the invasion they could see. They feared the invasion still hidden behind it. What they believed was that the Allies might use Normandy as bait. A first blow. A diversion. A bloody distraction designed to pull German reserves away from the real landing zone. What they did not yet understand was that the bait had already been swallowed long before the first landing craft reached the beach. The deception had begun not with gunfire, but with paperwork. It had begun with radio signals sent for units that did not exist. With inflatable tanks arranged in English fields. With dummy landing craft positioned where German reconnaissance might find them. With false messages passed through double agents the Germans trusted. With one famous American general placed at the center of a phantom army because German intelligence already feared his name. George S. Patton. To the Germans, Patton was aggressive, reckless, dangerous. A man who would not sit idle if the real invasion was about to begin. So when they believed he was commanding a massive Allied force in southeastern England, opposite Pas-de-Calais, the lie felt less like a lie. Felt like confirmation. That was the genius of the deception. It did not ask German commanders to believe something absurd. It invited them to believe what they already suspected. At 3:17 that morning, the map was still lying quietly on the table. Normandy was burning. Calais was waiting. And somewhere in the machinery of German command, the most dangerous question of the day had begun to form. Was this the invasion, or was this only the first act? The men in that room did not know it yet, but the army they feared most would never land on any beach. It had already done its work. The coast Germany expected. Pas-de-Calais looked right. That was why the deception worked. If the Allies had tried to convince German commanders that the main invasion would come at some absurd, distant, impractical point along the French coast, the lie would have collapsed under its own weight. Military intelligence does not only ask what the enemy says. It asks what the enemy can do. It studies distance, ports, roads, rail lines, beaches, tides, air cover, and supply routes. It looks for the practical answer. And in 1944, Pas-de-Calais was painfully practical. From Dover to Calais, the channel was at its narrowest. The crossing was shorter. The route into northern France appeared more direct. From there, Allied armies could push toward Belgium, the Ruhr, and the industrial heart of Germany. Every mile mattered. Every hour mattered. Every ton of fuel and ammunition mattered. To German planners, geography seemed to speak in a clear voice. If the Allies wanted to come, they would come there. And the Germans had prepared accordingly. The Atlantic Wall was never equally strong everywhere. No defensive system that vast could be. Concrete bunkers, artillery positions, minefields, radar sites, and coastal batteries were spread across thousands of miles. But attention gathered where fear gathered. Calais drew that fear naturally. The Allies understood this. They did not need to create German expectation from nothing. They only had to sharpen it. A good deception does not begin with fantasy. It begins with the enemy's habits. German commanders believed the Allies would use overwhelming force, careful preparation, and a major port or direct route to sustain the invasion. That belief was not foolish. Amphibious warfare is a problem of logistics before it becomes a problem of courage. Men can storm a beach, but armies must be fed after they land. Tanks need fuel. Artillery needs shells. Wounded men need evacuation. Engineers need roads, bridges, cranes, and steel. The first wave may win a shoreline. The second, third, and fourth waves decide whether the invasion lives. So Calais made sense. That was the trap. Across the Channel, the Allies built a picture that fit the German imagination. Camps appeared in southeastern England. Radio traffic suggested formations assembling. Vehicles seemed to gather. Landing craft appeared to wait. The illusion did not have to be perfect. It only had to be consistent enough to survive doubt. In German intelligence rooms, analysts gathered fragments and tried to turn them into certainty. A report here, a sighting there, a signal pattern, a source inside Britain, a name attached to a formation. FUSAG, the first U.S. Army group. A great phantom gathering opposite the most obvious target. And behind it, Patton. That mattered. A fake unit without a believable commander is only a shadow. But a fake unit attached to a man the enemy respects becomes something heavier. Patton had fought in North Africa and Sicily. His reputation had crossed enemy lines long before his troops did. German intelligence watched him because they believed he represented Allied aggression at its sharpest. If Patton was in southeastern England, then perhaps the real blow had not yet fallen. This was the heart of the deception. The Allies used a real man to give weight to a false army. They used real German expectations to protect an unreal operation. They used the logic of geography to pull German attention away from the place where men would actually die. Normandy was not ignored. The Germans knew it was possible. They had defenses there. They had troops there. They had commanders who understood that the coast was vulnerable. But in war, danger is not only measured by what is possible. It is measured by what leaders believe is probable. Calais remained probable. And because Calais remained probable, Normandy would be judged through that lens even after the first reports arrived. This is where belief becomes dangerous. It does not disappear when facts appear. It bends the facts into a shape it can accept. On the morning of June 6th, Normandy was real. But to men trained to expect Calais, reality still looked incomplete. That incomplete picture bought the Allies something more valuable than surprise. It bought time. And time on an invasion beach is measured in blood. The army that wasn't there. The first U.S. Army group had headquarters, signals, movement, noise, and a famous commander. What it did not have was an army. Not in the way German intelligence imagined it. Not in the way a real army exists, with men cleaning rifles in muddy camps, mechanics replacing track pins, medics packing morphine, cooks boiling coffee, clerks losing forms, and officers shouting over engines. FUSAG was a structure built to be seen from a distance. It was designed for the enemy's eyes, ears, and expectations. It existed because German intelligence needed it to exist. In southeastern England, the Allies gave the illusion a body. Dummy vehicles, staged activity, controlled rumors, false headquarters patterns, radio traffic that suggested formations preparing for action. The details were not random. They were placed like pieces on a board. A decoy army is difficult to build because armies are messy things. They create waste, movement, noise, mistakes, Gossip, traffic jams, medical problems, supply demands, and endless messages. Too little activity looks false. Too much activity looks theatrical. The deception planners had to create something that felt alive without letting it become too clean. Somewhere in that strange performance was a young signalman, perhaps sitting in a hut with a wireless set warm under his hands, sending traffic for men who were not there. He might not have known the entire deception. Many did not. He knew his portion. He knew the schedule. He knew the call signs. He knew that if he sent too little, the enemy might doubt. If he sent too much, the enemy might notice the pattern. His job was not to defeat a German division. His job was to make one wait. That is harder than it sounds. The illusion of FUSAG worked because it did not stand alone. It was reinforced from several directions. German reconnaissance might see physical evidence. German signals intelligence might hear wireless activity. German agents might report what seemed to be matching information. German analysts might compare all of it and conclude that separate sources were confirming the same truth. But they were not separate truths. They were reflections of one design. This is what made the deception so dangerous. It entered the German system as multiple streams of evidence. By the time it reached senior commanders, it no longer looked like one lie. It looked like a pattern. And soldiers trust patterns. A commander under pressure cannot personally inspect every beach, every field, every wireless intercept, every rumor. He relies on systems. Intelligence officers summarize. Staff officers interpret. Maps simplify. Reports move upward. Doubt is compressed into conclusions. By June 1944, one of those conclusions was that a powerful Allied army remained in England, ready to strike Pas-de-Calais. The Germans were not fools for believing this. They were trapped because the deception respected their intelligence. It gave them enough to work with. It gave them evidence that seemed imperfect, which made it more believable. It gave them Patton, whose presence made emotional sense. It gave them Calais, which made geographic sense. And it gave them Normandy as something that could be explained away. That was the cruelest part. Once the Normandy landings began, the deception did not have to deny them. It only had to reframe them. Yes, the Allies had landed. Yes, the fighting was real. Yes, men were dying. But perhaps this was still a preliminary attack. Perhaps the main blow was being held back. Perhaps Patton was waiting. Perhaps Calais was next. In that word, perhaps, the Phantom Army found its power. It did not need certainty. It needed hesitation. Every hour that German commanders debated the meaning of Normandy, Allied engineers worked under fire. Every hour of doubt allowed more men to cross the beaches, more vehicles to land, more artillery to come ashore, more supply dumps to form behind the dunes. The fake army had no rifles, but it changed where real rifles waited. And yet radio traffic and paper formations were not enough. A ghost army, to survive scrutiny, needed something the enemy could see. So the Allies began building shadows in fields. Rubber, canvas, and shadows. A rubber tank is a ridiculous thing until someone points a reconnaissance camera at it. Up close, the illusion can be almost insulting. Canvas seams, inflatable shapes, wooden frames, paint where armor should be, tracks that do not crush the earth like steel, barrels that cannot fire, vehicles light enough to be moved by men who would never survive lifting the real thing. But war is rarely seen up close by the people making the largest decisions. From the air, in poor light, through cloud, smoke, distance, and expectation, a shape can become a weapon. A row of dummy landing craft can become preparation. A fake vehicle park can become an armored formation. A staged camp can become proof that intercepted signals are telling the truth. The Allies understood that deception had to speak in layers. A radio voice could suggest an army. A double agent could report it. But a photograph, even an imperfect one, could quiet doubt. German analysts did not need to see everything. They needed to see enough. In fields and along roads in Britain, men assembled objects that were never meant to fight. They built false weight, false readiness, false intention. Imagine one of them before dawn, kneeling in wet grass beside a dummy vehicle, fingers numb from cold, trying to secure a line before the wind shifts the shape out of place. He is not storming a beach. He is not firing at an enemy. He may feel almost foolish. Around him there is no glory, only canvas, mud, tools, and orders spoken quietly. But if he fails, the illusion weakens. If the illusion weakens, German reserves may move. If German reserves move, men at Normandy may die in larger numbers. That is the hidden pressure of deception work. The battlefield is not always where the danger is visible. Sometimes it is in a field where a man ties rope around something that cannot shoot, knowing it may still help decide whether others live. The Germans had used deception themselves. Every major army understood camouflage, false positions, dummy guns, and misleading signals. But Operation Fortitude operated at a different scale. It was not merely hiding a unit or confusing a local commander. It was attempting to shape the strategic imagination of an entire enemy command. That required discipline. The dummy equipment had to appear where it made sense. Movement had to be suggested but not overplayed. Too perfect an illusion becomes suspicious. Real armies are untidy. They leave marks. They move at inconvenient times. They create noise in uneven bursts. The deception planners had to imitate imperfection. And behind all of it stood a hard truth. No dummy tank would matter if the Germans did not already believe the army behind it should exist. Rubber and canvas did not create the fear. They gave fear a shape. To German eyes, the signs gathered. The invasion force at Calais seemed to remain. The formations appeared not yet committed. Patton had not struck. Normandy, however violent, could still be only the opening move. This belief helped hold German attention in place during the critical period after D-Day. It did not freeze every unit. It did not paralyze the entire German army. War is never that clean. But it fed the hesitation, reinforced caution, and made commanders think twice before stripping Calais of strength. That was enough. The irony was almost unbearable. Real Allied soldiers were fighting through surf, wire, mines, and machine gun fire, while fake Allied formations stood safely in fields. One army bled. Another army deceived. Both mattered. But the most powerful tool in the deception was not rubber. It was trust. The Germans had sources. They had agents. They believed some of them were risking their lives to send the truth. One of those men was selling them the most important lie of the war. The spy who made the lie breathe. A lie becomes more dangerous when it arrives from someone you trust. Juan Pujol Garcia understood that. The Germans knew him as an agent. The British knew him by a different name, GARBO. He was not the only double agent in the Allied deception system, but his role became one of the most remarkable. He helped create an invisible network of fictional subagents, each supposedly placed where useful information might be gathered. The Germans believed they had a window into Britain. In reality, they were looking into a room designed for them. Pujol's value was not simply that he lied. Anyone can lie. Bad lies are too neat. Desperate lies move too quickly. Useful lies contain texture. They admit small failures. They provide information that seems late, incomplete, or limited by human difficulty. They make the receiver work a little. That work creates ownership. German intelligence did not merely receive GARBO's reports. It interpreted them. That made the deception stronger. Through agents like GARBO, the Allies fed the Germans pieces of a larger picture. That a major force remained in England, that Pas-de-Calais remained under threat, that Normandy might not be the decisive landing. The reports did not operate alone. They matched other signs: radio traffic, dummy equipment, Patton's apparent position, and German expectations. Again and again, the deception returned to the same principle. Make the enemy believe he has discovered the truth himself. There is a strange intimacy in intelligence warfare. A field commander may fear artillery, tanks, aircraft, and infantry. An intelligence officer fears contamination. He fears that a source he trusts is being controlled. He fears that the map on his desk is not wrong because of ignorance, but because the enemy has touched it. That fear is corrosive. By June 1944, the German intelligence picture had been shaped by Allied hands more deeply than many German commanders could admit. The reports supporting Pas-de-Calais did not feel like fantasy. They were woven through systems of analysis, reputation, geography, and source reliability. And when the invasion began at Normandy, GARBO's deception became even more important. The Germans needed an explanation. They needed to understand why the Allies had landed where they had. The deception gave them one. Normandy was real but not final. The main attack might still come. The greater danger might still be waiting across from Calais. This is where the lie breathed. It adjusted to reality. A fragile deception collapses when facts change. A strong deception absorbs facts and gives them new meaning. Normandy did not disprove Calais. Under the logic of fortitude, Normandy could confirm it. The first landing might be the diversion. The second landing under Patton might be the decisive blow. That idea was deadly because it did not require the Germans to ignore what was happening. It only required them to delay full commitment. Inside German headquarters, reports accumulated. Casualty figures, beachhead maps, requests for reserves, air reconnaissance, signals intercepts, rumors from agents, orders from above, contradictions, pressure. A commander could look at Normandy and know it was serious. He could still fear Calais more. That was the psychological victory. On the ground, a German officer did not need to say aloud that he had been fooled. He only had to keep a division waiting. He only had to preserve strength for a second blow that would never come. He only had to hesitate while Allied strength expanded on the beaches. By the time some doubts sharpened into understanding, the invasion had already begun to root itself into France. Men were landing. Roads were being repaired. Engineers were clearing obstacles. Supplies were piling up. The beachhead was becoming less fragile by the hour. The spy had not fired a shot, but his reports had helped shape where shots were not fired. And then, at dawn, the false war met the real one. Normandy burns. The first men who landed in Normandy did not feel saved by deception. They felt water in their boots, smoke in their lungs, sand under their fingernails, and fear tightening the muscles in their throats. The sea was crowded with landing craft, each one carrying men toward a line of coast that looked, from a distance, almost still. Then the stillness broke. Shells landed among the waves. Machine guns opened from concrete and earth. Men jumped too early and sank beneath the weight of equipment. Others reached the beach only to find there was nowhere safe to stand. For them, the great deception was invisible. No soldier crawling through surf at Omaha could see FUSAG. No engineer cutting wire under fire could hear the false radio traffic in England. No medic dragging a wounded man behind an obstacle could know that German commanders were still weighing the possibility of another landing at Calais. He only knew the next few yards. That matters. A documentary about deception must never make the mistake of pretending deception made war clean. It did not. The beaches were real. The dead were real. The terror was real. Allied intelligence helped shape the conditions of battle, but it did not walk men safely across mine sand. Normandy burned because the Germans there fought hard. Coastal troops fired from prepared positions. Artillery searched the beaches and exits. Obstacles tore into landing craft. Inland, airborne troops struggled in darkness, scattered across fields and hedgerows, separated from units, equipment, and plans. In some places, confusion helped them. In others, it nearly destroyed them. The land itself seemed built for ambush. Normandy was not open country ready for rapid movement. It was hedgerows, orchards, stone villages, narrow roads, flooded areas, and fields that broke formations into fragments. Every advance could become a small private battle. Yet beyond the noise of the beaches, another battle was unfolding inside German command. The question remained, was this the main invasion? That question had consequences. If the Germans immediately accepted Normandy as the decisive landing, then every available reserve should move toward the beachhead. But if Normandy was a diversion, then moving too much strength away from Calais could open the door to disaster. The Allies had placed German commanders in a cruel position. React too slowly and Normandy grows. React too aggressively, and Calais may be stripped for Patton's phantom blow. A commander can survive being wrong once, He may not survive being wrong in the direction the enemy wants. So the Germans watched. They waited. They argued through reports and assumptions. The invasion at Normandy became larger by the hour, but the ghost at Calais did not disappear. It stood behind every decision like a second coastline. This was the moment Fortitude had been designed to create. Not a simple trick. A delay inside the enemy's mind. The first 24 hours of an amphibious invasion are fragile. The attackers must land enough men to hold. They must bring ashore weapons heavy enough to resist counterattack. They must clear exits from the beach. They must establish communications. They must survive the first German response. Every delay in that response matters. An armored division arriving earlier might change a local battle. A reserve held in place might never influence the beach at all. A commander waiting for certainty may discover that certainty arrives only after the opportunity is gone. That is what German commanders feared more than they admitted. Not that rubber tanks could beat them, but that they had been made uncertain at the precise moment certainty mattered most. Normandy was no longer a theory. It was a wound in the Atlantic Wall. And while German commanders watched Calais, the wound widened. The mathematics of hesitation. War is often remembered in dramatic images. Landing craft doors dropping, men running through surf, aircraft burning in the sky, tanks grinding through broken towns. But sometimes war turns on quieter numbers. Hours, miles, fuel, road capacity, bridge weight, radio delay, the number of vehicles that can move down one road before dawn. The time it takes a commander to receive a report, trust it, issue an order, and watch that order become movement. The Allies did not need German commanders to do nothing forever. They needed them to lose time. In the days after June 6th, time became a battlefield. Every hour allowed the Allies to land more men. Every tide brought more equipment. Every cleared exit from the beach made the next movement easier. Every supply dump made the beachhead harder to crush. What had been fragile at dawn became more solid by evening, then harder still by the next morning. This is the arithmetic of invasion. A beachhead is not safe because it exists. It becomes safe because enough weight accumulates behind it. Infantry alone cannot hold forever. They need artillery, anti-tank guns, engineers, ammunition, medical support, vehicles, fuel, command posts, air cover, communications, roads. The Germans knew this. That is why the early response mattered so much. But Fortitude had changed the calculation. Calais could not be ignored. The phantom threat seemed too large. Patton seemed too dangerous. The intelligence picture seemed too consistent. If German commanders moved too much strength away from Calais and a second Allied force landed there, the consequences could be catastrophic. So they preserved strength against an army that was not coming. The effect cannot be reduced to one simple claim. It was not as if every German movement was stopped by fake tanks. Many factors shaped German response. Allied air superiority, damaged transport networks, command confusion, Hitler's control over reserves, local resistance, and the sheer chaos of battle. But deception added another layer of restraint. It made caution look responsible. That was its power. A staff officer looking at the map could defend hesitation. He could say Normandy was serious, but Calais remained decisive. He could argue that the enemy had not yet committed his main force. He could point to intelligence reports, radio patterns, and Patton's supposed army. He could tell himself he was not being fooled. He was being prudent. That is how deception often works. It does not always make a commander believe something impossible. It makes the wrong decision feel professional. On the beaches, men paid for each hour with exhaustion. Engineers worked through fire to open routes inland. Naval guns fired until barrels heated. Medics bent over bodies in sand and mud. Drivers tried to push vehicles through congestion. Officers searched for units that had landed in the wrong place. Military police tried to impose order on roads that looked like the aftermath of a storm made of steel. Behind them, the sea kept delivering the invasion. That was the number that mattered most. More men, more trucks, more ammunition, more artillery, more command structure, more depth, more ability to survive the counterblow when it came. By the time German certainty grew, the Allies were no longer only clinging to a beach. They were building an army in France. And the fake army in England had helped protect the real one long enough to breathe. Yet deception's success created an uncomfortable question. If a phantom army could influence real divisions, what did that say about the men who believed in maps, reports, and chains of command? What did it say about war itself? The answer would not be found in headquarters. It would be found among the men beneath the lie. The men beneath the lie. A man wounded on a beach does not bleed less because the enemy has been deceived. The blood is the same. The fear is the same. The hands shaking around a field dressing are the same. On June 6th and in the days that followed, Allied soldiers did not experience Normandy as a triumph of intelligence. They experienced it as noise, confusion, pain, and orders shouted into wind and gunfire. Many had been told very little. Some knew only their objective and the man beside them. Some never made it far enough to learn whether the plan had worked. There is a danger in telling the story of Operation Fortitude as if it were a clean chess move. It was not. It was a support beam under a collapsing roof. It helped. It mattered. But men still had to cross the killing ground. On the beaches, a medic might crawl toward a wounded soldier with sand kicked into his face by bullets striking nearby. He might not know whether the man was British, American, Canadian, or already beyond saving. He knew only that the voice had called out once and then stopped. Around him, the invasion was not a map arrow. It was torn equipment, broken radios, seawater turning dark around boots, and officers trying to make decisions without enough information. Inland, paratroopers moved through darkness and hedgerows, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups that had never trained together. They cut wires, blocked roads, attacked gun positions, and tried to find landmarks in country that looked nothing like the briefing maps. Some landed far from their drop zones. Some lost weapons in flooded fields. Some knocked on French doors in the dark, unable to know whether the person inside would help them or betray them. The deception could delay German reserves, could not remove the machine gun in front of one man. This human truth makes the success of the decoy armies more serious, not less, because the lie had value only if it reduced the pressure on real men. Every German formation held back from the decisive place gave the men at Normandy a slightly better chance. Not safety, never safety, a chance. For German soldiers, too, the deception had a human cost. Men stationed near Calais waited for an invasion that never came. They maintained readiness under tension. They scanned the sea. They trusted that their commanders understood the larger picture. Some may have heard rumors of terrible fighting in Normandy and wondered why they were still there. War often traps ordinary men inside decisions made by distant rooms. The German soldier in a bunker near Calais did not create fortitude. The Allied infantryman under fire at Normandy did not know its full shape. The radio operator sending false traffic in England might never meet the men his work helped protect. The double agent typing a message in controlled secrecy might never hear the sound of shells landing on the beach. Yet their lives were connected. That is what makes this story unsettling. A man tying down a dummy vehicle in a wet English field was part of the same battle as a man crawling through smoke in Normandy. A false report in an intelligence file could influence whether a Real tank moved. A name on a fake order of battle could help determine whether a wounded soldier survived long enough to be carried off the beach. The battlefield was larger than the battlefield. And after the war, many of the people who served in that hidden space did not speak of it. Some could not. Some were never asked. Some returned home with work that sounded, if told plainly, almost impossible to believe. You did what in the war? I pretended to be an army. There is no easy medal for that sentence. And for decades, much of the recognition came late, quietly, or not at all. The war they couldn't talk about. Victory has a public face. Parades, photographs, flags, speeches, names carved into stone, ships returning, men embracing families on railway platforms, cities trying to believe that normal life can begin again. But some victories come home in silence. The men and women connected to wartime deception often carried stories that could not be told simply. Intelligence operations remained sensitive. Double-agent systems were not casual dinner conversation. Deception units had worked by making themselves invisible, and invisibility does not vanish just because the war ends. A tank crew can point to a battlefield. Pilot can name a mission. An infantryman can describe a hill, a village, a river crossing. But how does a man explain that his battlefield was the enemy's belief? How does he explain that the thing he built was fake, but the consequences were real? Some of the deception work of the Second World War remained under-recognized for years. Tactical deception units such as the later Ghost Army would become famous only long after the war, when their use of inflatable vehicles, sound deception, radio impersonation, and visual misdirection became more widely known. Their work belonged to a tradition that Fortitude had demonstrated at a strategic level. Make the enemy see what you need him to see, hear what you need him to hear, and fear what you need him to fear. The men who did this work were not magicians. They were artists, engineers, radio operators, drivers, clerks, intelligence officers, actors in uniform, and soldiers trained to treat illusion as a weapon. They understood that a fake tank positioned badly was useless. A false radio net operated carelessly could expose the entire game. A decoy that looked too perfect might be more suspicious than an empty field. Their craft depended on restraint. The best lie in war is rarely the loudest. It is the one that fits naturally into the enemy's existing picture. Fortitude worked because it respected German reasoning. It did not ask German commanders to abandon logic. It fed their logic until it carried them away from reality. Post-war analysis would make the deception easier to see. Files could be compared. Timelines could be reconstructed. Reports could be placed beside what actually happened. Historians could trace how false information moved through German intelligence channels. But commanders in 1944 did not have a historian's desk. They had pressure, incomplete reports, and the possibility of catastrophe if they guessed wrong. That is why many German commanders feared the decoy armies more than they admitted. To admit fear of a fake army is to admit something humiliating, that the enemy reached not your front line but your judgment. Armies pride themselves on discipline, command, intelligence, and professional assessment. Fortitude attacked all of those. It made the German command system cooperate in its own confusion. It turned caution into delay. It turned intelligence into uncertainty. It turned Patton, who was real, into proof of an army that was not. The silence after the war was not only about secrecy. It was also about pride. No commander wants to say that he kept strength waiting for a ghost. No intelligence service wants to admit that its trusted sources were controlled. No military machine wants to look back and see that the enemy did not merely break through defenses, but entered the assumptions behind them. Yet that is exactly where the deepest wound lay. The Germans had built walls of concrete. The Allies walked through a door made of belief. The fear behind the map. A map can make war look clean. Blue lines, red arrows, coastal sectors, unit symbols, timetables, objectives, reserves, distances measured with a ruler, decisions reduced to shapes. But no map shows fear accurately. It cannot show the hesitation in a staff officer's hand before he moves a marker. It cannot show the uncertainty hidden inside a commander's voice when he says, "Wait." It cannot show the pressure of knowing that one wrong assumption may open an entire front. German commanders in 1944 were not afraid of rubber in the simple sense. They did not imagine inflatable tanks rolling into Berlin. They feared something more professional, more damaging, and harder to confess. They feared being made to misread the war. The decoy armies mattered because they attacked the connection between information and action. A commander can survive imperfect information if he understands its limits. But deception poisons the limit itself. It makes true reports and false reports resemble each other. It forces every conclusion to carry a shadow. Normandy is real, but is it decisive? Calais is quiet, but is it waiting? Patton is visible, but why has he not moved? Reports say one thing. Geography says another. Sources confirm a third. The coast burns in one place while the mind remains fixed on another. That is how the Phantom Army held power. Not through strength, but through ambiguity. In war, ambiguity costs time. Time costs lives. And lives, once spent, cannot be returned by a corrected intelligence report. The Allied deception did not win Normandy by itself. It operated alongside naval power, air superiority, airborne operations, logistics, engineering, infantry courage, and German command failures. But its contribution was unique. It shaped the enemy's interpretation of events while those events were still unfolding. That is a rare and dangerous kind of weapon. A shell explodes once. A false belief can keep exploding inside decisions for days. For the German command system, the fear of Calais remained useful to the Allies after Normandy began. The ghost did not vanish at dawn. It lingered. It stood behind the real battle, making the Germans ask whether the visible crisis was only part of a larger design. The Allies had turned German caution into Allied protection. That is why decoy armies could be feared more than admitted. Their success suggested that modern war was no longer only a contest of firepower, armor, and maneuver. It was also a contest over reality itself. Who defines the battlefield? Who decides what the enemy believes he is seeing? Who controls the moment before action? A commander who sees a tank may order anti-tank guns forward. A commander who sees a possible deception must first decide whether the tank is real. That pause is small. Sometimes it is enough. The Phantom Army was not invincible. It was not perfect. It depended on German assumptions, Allied discipline, and the chaos of a vast invasion. Had some details failed, had German intelligence drawn different conclusions, had commanders taken greater risks, the story might have bent another way. But war does not require perfection. It requires advantage. At Normandy, the advantage created by deception was measured in uncertainty. The Germans could not ignore the real landing, but they could not release themselves from the expected one. Between those two fears, the Allies forced open a space. Into that space came men, vehicles, guns, fuel, and time. The fake army did not cross the channel. The real army did. Calais waited for a ghost. Days passed. The coastline opposite England remained tense. German forces still watched the water. The great second landing did not come. Patton's supposed army did not appear on the horizon. The sea near Calais did not fill with the decisive invasion fleet German commanders had feared. But by then, the damage had already been done. Normandy had become more than a landing. It had become a foothold, then a front, then a growing Allied presence that could no longer be dismissed as a diversion. The beachhead expanded under constant strain. The fighting inland was brutal, slow, and costly. Hedgerows turned advances into grinding struggles. Villages became strong points. Roads became targets. The German army still fought with discipline and violence. Deception had not ended the battle. It had helped the battle begin under conditions the Allies could survive. That distinction matters. If the story is told carelessly, fortitude becomes a magic trick. Fake tanks win D-Day. Rubber defeats steel. But the truth is more serious. Deception did not replace combat. It shaped the timing and direction of combat. It protected the fragile early hours when the invasion could have been most vulnerable. The Ghost Army's greatest achievement was not spectacle. It was delay. And delay rarely looks dramatic in a photograph. There is no single image of a German division not moving. No iconic frame of a commander deciding to wait. No explosion marking the moment when a false report prevents a real order. Yet these invisible moments can matter as much as visible ones. The men at Calais waited for a battle that existed in the intelligence picture more than in the world. The men at Normandy fought the battle that decided the future of France. Between them stood an illusion built from thousands of small acts. A radio signal sent at the right time, a dummy craft placed in view, a double agent's message phrased carefully enough to be believed, a famous general allowed to remain visible where the Germans expected danger. The deception worked because it was patient. It did not try to shout over reality. It whispered beside it. Even after Normandy's scale became undeniable, the fear of another landing influenced thinking. The Germans had to consider whether committing too much might invite disaster elsewhere. That fear was not imaginary from their viewpoint. Amphibious deception had historical precedent. The Allies had the shipping, the troops, and the operational imagination to strike in more than one place. Calais remained strategically valuable. The lie survived because it was attached to a possibility. That is the strongest kind. A completely impossible lie dies quickly. A possible lie, placed carefully, can live long enough to change events. By the time German commanders could fully release themselves from the Calais expectation, the Allied position in Normandy had hardened. The question was no longer whether the invasion could be thrown back at the water's edge. The war had moved inland. The map in the command post had changed. Not all at once. Not with one dramatic stroke. But gradually, under pressure, as reality forced itself through the layers of expectation. The old belief had not vanished willingly. It had been defeated by accumulation. More Allied troops ashore, more supplies landed, more roads taken, more German reports confirming what some had feared and others resisted. Normandy was not the diversion. Calais was the waiting room for an attack that would never arrive. The army German commanders feared most had been an absence. An absence had held them. What they believed, what really happened, returned to the room. The map, the telephone, the cigarette burning down in the ashtray. The officer leaning over the coast, trying to decide which silence mattered more, the silence before Calais or the noise from Normandy. By the end, the answer seems obvious. It was not obvious then. That is why this story still matters. German commanders believed the main Allied blow would come where geography made the most sense. They believed the narrowest crossing, the direct route, the familiar danger. They believed Patton's presence pointed toward the real invasion force. They believed Normandy might be part of the plan, but not necessarily the center of it. Those beliefs were not foolish in isolation. They became fatal because the Allies turned them into a cage. What really happened was quieter than the great images of D-Day suggest. Before the beaches filled with landing craft, before the naval guns shook the coast, before the hedgerows swallowed men and machines, another battle had already been fought across signals, reports, photographs, rumors, and trust. The Allies did not only hide the truth. They made the falsehood feel more complete. They built an army from fragments. Rubber, canvas, wireless traffic, controlled leaks, double agents, staged movement, and the reputation of a real general attached to unreal formations. They gave German intelligence something to find. They allowed German commanders to think they were being careful. And then Normandy happened. The real landing came under fire. Men died in the surf. Engineers worked through smoke. Medics crawled through sand. Paratroopers stumbled through flooded fields and unfamiliar lanes. Sailors, pilots, infantrymen, drivers, clerks, and commanders all entered a day where no plan survived untouched. But behind the violence, the ghost army remained. Not as a cartoon trick, not as a clean victory, as pressure, pressed against German decisions. It made Calais difficult to abandon. It made Normandy harder to interpret. It made hesitation defensible at the very moment speed was needed most. That was the hidden fear. A fake army had forced real commanders to doubt real events. When the war ended, the beaches remained. The cemeteries remained. The bunkers remained. The maps were folded. The files locked away. The stories delayed. Some names became famous. Others disappeared into footnotes, sealed documents, or family memories that sounded too strange to explain. I was part of an army that was not there. But the men who made the deception work were part of the battlefield, even if they never stood on the beach. The signalman at his wireless set. The crew arranging dummy equipment before dawn. The intelligence officer checking the phrasing of a false report. The double agent sending the message that had to be believed, but not too easily. Each one carried a small piece of a weapon made from uncertainty. And uncertainty changed the war. They believed the real danger was still waiting across from Calais. But what really happened was that the danger had already entered their command rooms, their reports, their assumptions, and their maps. The army they feared most never fired a shot. It never had to. If you watched this from the beginning, leave a comment with where you are watching from. And if someone in your family served during the war, on any front, in any uniform, in any role remembered or forgotten, you are welcome to share their story below. These are the histories that survive because people keep speaking their names. Subscribe to WW2 Warfront for more documentary stories about what they believed, what really happened, and the forgotten moments that shaped the war.